Hello, and welcome to episode 8 of Trails in the Pod. I'm Colin, and that's Kevin.
Today, we have a very special episode for all of our libertarian viewers. We got 12-year-olds working in the factories. We have tweens with guns. This episode is for all of you.
Yeah, personal freedom is that huge focus for this chapter. Absolutely. Before we start, we want to plug our Twitter again, at Trails in the Pod. You can follow us on there. You can get in contact with us there. But also, I want to point out something, Kevin, because I edited the last episode, right? We trade off and
did a good job.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm not going to be humble about it. I'm a funny guy. And I know this because when I tell jokes, you're laughing all the time, but you're not saying anything. So when we listen to it, it sounds like I'm laughing at my own jokes, and then you just ignore it and keep going. Meanwhile, this motherfucker has a smile on his face. He's leaning back. So I just want the audience to know that. Do you have anything you want to say before we begin?
Just that this episode, unlike the other chapter breakdowns we've done, it doesn't quite lend itself, I think, and Colin thought so as well. It doesn't lend itself to moment-by-moment analysis and breakdown because, let's be honest, Colin, not that much happens for a lot of this chapter. It's a lot of plot setup. You only see the beginnings of the climax of it going off in the very end.
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking about the important bits that matter for understanding the whole of the game, other than like characters, right? Tita is important to know as a character, but, she gets introduced. We do see a little bit of, sister bonding between Estelle and Tita. We see a little bit of Estelle's emotional development towards Joshua, but mostly it's going back and forth, doing different stuff, meeting Zin, up until Professor Russell gets kidnapped. And then the parts after that, it's like really important plot stuff. I mean, I would go so far as to say that the plot of the game starts in this chapter.
Yeah, it's the last 45 minutes, maybe an hour, where everything goes up to 10 and it does not stop until the chapter is done.
But that doesn't mean that we can't talk about what happened along the way. Just that probably much like the chapter, we're going to be backloaded with most of our discussion. There's going to be about the back half. But we do start off with this very weird prologue type thing between Agate and some black hooded men who he's fighting.
Agate fights them, defeats them easily. Then he gets into a much more difficult and challenging fight with a mysterious woman with a red hook.
That is not a woman. That is a man.
With a mysterious man with a red hook on his face mask. And that man is playing with Agate, jumping all about, showing he can dodge the attacks and win the fight, basically, without landing a finger on Agate. It's like a cat toying with a mouse.
Yeah. Before I get into my analysis of this, I want to know what your initial impressions are of this guy. Because this is not the first time that we've seen him.
I thought it was a woman because in the end of the chapter, we see a woman with Colonel Richard with the same kind of facial getup.
No, you see the same man.
Never mind. Well, but we do see whoever this man is, they have ties to Imperial intelligence. That's not a surprise based on what we learned, but this rot goes deep. I thought this was a shadowy, secret organization that's been lying in the background for 500 years, 1,000 years, like all shadowy, secret organizations do. They don't have to worry about overkeep or mission creep, whatever. They got a mission, they are good for a millennium. But I'm glad to see it's just a much more prosaic, a much more banal, people in the military want power and money.
I will say, as somebody who knows who this guy is and knows his backstory, that the scene that he has with Agate is actually really poignant. He says some stuff that points towards real connections, common backgrounds between Agate and this mysterious man. And once you know all of it, you'll agree with me that this scene is a very good job at foreshadowing it.
So my guess now is that this mysterious man is essentially a bracer gone bad because we haven't seen that many of them, and narratively it's not that interesting if every bracer, even Agate, is an upstanding, more or less, force for goodness in the world.
Well, much like all of your predictions, I neither confirm nor deny, but I'm looking forward to seeing if you're right or not as we play through the games.
So after that, we say goodbye to Kloe when she goes with Joshua and Estelle to the mouth of the tunnel that takes them to Zeiss. After that, we have a mysterious scene with Kloe and Lieutenant Schwartz after a pretty odd goodbye to Joshua and Estelle. Now, could you comment a bit more on that, Colin?
Sure. I mean, I think that, again, I know what's going on, so I can't say so much, but clearly what we see in this scene is that there are strong ties between Kloe and the Royal Guard, right? She knows who Schwartz is. They definitely are linked in some way, right? They speak very familiarly. Also, Kloe makes it a point to state that she's going to be in Grand Cell for the Queen's coronation because she has family there.
I just had a wild ass prediction.
Okay.
Kloe is a noble.
Okay.
Yes, Kloe is known and knows the Royal Guard.
Yep.
I don't think Kloe is a noble. I think she's one step above. I think somehow she's connected to the royal family.
Well, we're just going to have to wait and see. Why won't we?
I mean, we know the queen does not have children because her nephew, the Duke, is the heir to the throne. So she can't be the teenage child, the teenage princess. But I think that she's tied deeply to the royal family, and I do not think it's only just the guard. I think it's more with the dynasty itself somehow.
Could be. But as I say, I'm not going to confirm. I'm not going to deny. All right, but while we're down in this, so Estelle and Joshua, we head down to this tunnel and we run in to a small little girl named Tita, who's going to be fixing a light. And I know that you have some very strong feelings about the presence of this girl in the mines.
Okay. One, sending a girl alone to repair the light. When we know from other instances, these are the lights that keep monsters at bay, that make travel only dangerous instead of suicidal for most people. So they send a 12, 13-year-old girl to do that alone. But it's okay. She has a gun. Not just a gun, a cannon.
She has a fucking cannon. She can defend herself, man.
That's horrifying. Why isn't she in school? She's not playing hooky because she's not in school. She's working for the factory.
Let me ask you this, Kevin. Have you ever seen a school in this game?
No.
Exactly.
We have not seen.
There has been mention of quote unquote Sunday school, where the church will educate the children. But at least on the sounds of it, that would happen on Sundays. Maybe it happens more frequently. In Crossbow, we're going to see a bit more of that. But I think it's fair to say that school is not an ever-present institution in Liberl. We haven't seen it.
Think back to Joshua and Estelle. They're the people we've spent the most time with, yeah?
Yeah.
I can't recall any sort of school memory shared between them. Remember when you fell asleep or when you missed the exam or whatever.
They do talk a bit about Estelle's performance in Sunday school in the beginning of the game, I think, in the prologue.
Not like the public schooling that you and I would be more familiar with.
No, but Sunday school serves a similar function. It's not just religious education, their Sunday school.
So it's like the general Sunday school you would find in, say, a 19th century town.
Yeah, exactly. Or like a, colonial America, you go to the schoolhouse.
So it does seem clear, counter to my point, that compulsory public education, secular education, does not exist.
So it seems.
But still, 12-year-old girl alone.
Oh, Kevin, let me ask you this question. Okay, we don't have a place to send her to be educated, right? It only happens on Sundays. So the kid's got to do something with her time. Is it not better that she can be productive to society, produce something, maybe take in some money for the home?
Okay. Moving aside Colin's election platform as he runs for office, on the contrary, think of it like this. Tita is quite smart.
Yeah, she's genius.
Yeah, she is. So wouldn't her talents be best suited for the theoretical or laboratory practical items where her use can be put to the greatest effect and not doing, in a sense, grunt work?
Well, we do see her do that, right, when she's doing stuff with her grandpa. and stuff like that. But it also, I don't think that technically speaking, she's employed by the factory. It seems to me more that she's always there and volunteers to help sometimes. And she seems to want to be very helpful to other people. So it wouldn't surprise me if she volunteered to go do that.
Then she should be paid for her time.
I agree. We don't know if she is or not. We've seen that not everybody in this factory follows the rules, right? The head of the factory is a smoker and breaks his own smoking ban.
Okay, Tita as a unit, what does she do? What role does she fill? How is she strong? How is she weak? Where does she fit into the flow of combat with her craft and with her arts?
She strikes me as Olivier, but better because she has wider AoE. So I'll expand upon that a little bit. We have her normal attack, which is a small radius cannon bomb. Does decent enough damage, but it's especially good when you can get 2 or more enemies in it at a time. But her her normal crafts, not only does it have a pretty big radius, like you can get a lot of enemies in there, it also makes them all blind so that they're less likely to hit you. She's very useful at crowd control in that way, as well as doing a lot of damage.
She's a mage, essentially. She can debuff enemies. She has ranged attacks, spells, essentially, and she's a glass cannon. If someone looks at Tita sideways, she will die.
That's true.
I think she has about 500, 600 health, somewhere in there.
She does start off very lower, not very, but a lower level than your party, at least on normal mode.
Yes, but when I got at the end, she was only about 1 level below Joshua and Estelle.
Yeah.
And she had several hundred less health.
Do you have HP quartz equipped to Josh and Estelle? Because she doesn't have any equipped, but you can fix that.
Oh, yes, I do.
Well, that would be why. But I mean, I still think that stands to reason. She doesn't come with any of them. And typically, at least the way that I've been playing, is that I don't really bother with the quartz on the guest party members because I don't know when they're going to be there. I don't know when they're not going to be there. And it seems fine enough for me to just use what they got. There's going to be a moment at the end of the game where you're going to want to take that a bit more seriously, but we're not there yet.
We're not there yet. We're here in Zeiss, the industrial city, with a bitchin' soundtrack. And I think, Colin, you have a lot more to say on that subject.
I don't have that much to say, but it is a fucking banger of a song. As I said in the last episode, I listen to these soundtracks a lot. Just today, I was listening to the Evolution remix of The Trails in the Sky OST, which it's always interesting to hear those because, you see like a different take on it. It's a remix. But every time I listen to the Zeiss theme, I feel like I'm in a technologically advanced place. I don't live in a technologically advanced place, but I feel like that.
And the music makes it feel separate and unique and different, which is what music and soundtracks should do. We'll have an episode on this later on at some point, but it makes the narrative and the plot and the characters better and more complete. And because Zeiss is different, it's so different. It is it's unlike what we've seen before. It's industrial, it's factories and commerce and change, whereas the other cities we've been to from Roland onward, they seem a lot like generic fantasy-esque cities. Yeah?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that before this, we've been fairly in what I call the early Final Fantasy version of fantasy. Namely, medieval, maybe early modern, but then you have a couple of technologically advanced things like airships or even electricity to some degree, but nothing to suggest that more modern inventions are here. So you walk into Zeiss, so you walk out of the factory, and the first thing you see is a big ass escalator. That's a recent thing. Escalators are not, oldie timey relics. It's a very technologically advanced thing to have, and it's right there smack dab in the middle of the city.
Zeiss is the city of progress, of the future.
Apparently not social progress because they're using child labor.
Well, some people would say that is social progress. But the first escalator is 1896. That is the cusp of the 20th century, of the 1900s. And I think it's safe to say Zeiss feels like a city about to barge right into the 1900s with all of the progress and horrors that entails.
Yes, but also like there's even technology that surpasses that. I mean, one of the things that we use, the Capel, I think it's called, it's essentially a proto computer, right? It's a database, it's an electronic database that you access via something that looks like a keyboard. We haven't seen the invention of like a personal computer or the internet yet, but all of a sudden, like we're starting to get to that point where even Liberl is experiencing the beginnings of a computer revolution.
It's almost steampunk, but in a way it's orb punk, where we see an invention of the gasoline and the combustion engine really hammers home this point where orbs are the basis of technology, the replacement of a lot of different technologies that we have in our modern world, but mostly with energy and power. It's replaced by orbs.
I think this chapter does a really good job at stressing how reliant this place is on orbs, precisely through the black orbment when it's causing this blackout phenomenon. You know, this is happening a little bit later in the chapter, but what you see is mass panic because the entire city shuts down. I'm sure that you've experienced this too. When you're sitting at home and you have a blackout, it kind of feels different. There's less noise in the air, kind of. There's less something. And then when the power turns back on, it's like, bam, wow, my house just came back to life. And that's, you see my apartment, I got technology everywhere. But Zeiss is the same way, that their city was destroyed, essentially, by a blackout.
Yeah, they are dependent and vulnerable to this technology and the black orbment. With that, I think it's going to foreshadow it could be used as a weapon of mass slaughter. What if you cut out all orbs in a city for a day, a month, forever, as a weapon or a threat of a weapon? Untold damage.
Well, and the other thing that you might want to consider, right? I mean, Liberl is not a kingdom in isolation. Other people are looking at it. You know, what would Erebonia do if they knew that something like this existed and can be used against them, or Calvard for that matter?
Erebonia, the country against whom the kingdom just fought a nasty war that ended not too long ago.
Yeah.
They'd be terrified.
Yeah. I mean, if I were the emperor of Erebonia, I'd probably justify some kind of invasion, you know, claim that they have some weapon of mass destruction in order to get it out.
So we've talked about Zeiss and the music, and we've talked about orbs. Now let's switch gears a bit and talk about one of the side quests in the city of Zeiss that I found extremely frustrating because of not just the difficulty, but how this difficulty was implemented in the game. And I think, Colin, you have a bit of a divergent point with me about this side quest.
Probably, but why don't you tell us what this side quest is so I can remember what it is?
So it's the first exterminate monster side quest in Zeiss. We're all familiar with them. You go to a new city, or after a plot point, you see exterminate monster. And the ones in this chapter in Zeiss, I thought were difficult to a frustrating and annoying level. Because a lot of them, but especially the first, the Chronocider, they were sponges that not just hit hard, but didn't have any weak points. And you just had to keep hitting them. And I just felt it was not fun because they were so spongy. I think their hit points were so inflated. It just felt like a tedious chore. And that raises a larger question, Colin, about how can you make difficulty harder besides just increasing the defense, attack, and hit points of monsters?
Well, I think that the snake-esque monsters that you brought up are a very good case study in that. It's another one of these exterminate monster side quests. I think you have a big snake-looking dude and a bunch of smaller counterparts, and they can do two things. They can attack you, which might cause you to get poisoned, or they can call for help, and another snake will spawn. And that is a really difficult fight because, especially the first time I did it, they were calling for aid all the time. So like I would kill one and two more would pop up. It's like, you know, fighting the Hydra. Meanwhile, I'm being drained of my poison, of my HP through poison the entire time. What I like about this fight, though, even though it's frustrating, is that it teaches you, A, that more enemies can spawn, and sometimes in a degree that you're going to find difficult to handle, so you have to figure out how to handle that. And B, it's forcing you to deal with status effects. You know, most of the time I find in JRPGs, you can kind of ignore status effects until the end of battle. You get paralyzed, okay, you wait for it to go away, and you go. Or, okay, yeah, I got poisoned, but I'm going to finish this fight in like 2 rounds, so I don't really need to cure the poison, and then I'll just heal up after. In that fight, you have to take care of the poison, because if you don't, you're going to die, which I found out when I died. But I'm also a bit disappointed by it because I thought of different ways to handle this, use more AoE attacks, use some food that cures poison a bit more. And then on my second attempt, I don't think a single snake summoned another snake. So I didn't actually get to use that strategy. I just managed to demolish them.
The randomness made it inconsequential.
I guess inconsequential. I guess I'd say more that I got a lucky break that ended up making the lesson that the fight was trying to teach me moot, but it was still trying to teach me a lesson. And I think that's where these exterminate monster quests are a success most of the time, because they're teaching you that bosses can fuck your shit up if you don't react properly.
Yeah, but if they have no weak points, if they have high attack, high defense, and what's the lesson besides hope they miss or hope one of your status debuffs works? Oh, wait, it doesn't have any weaknesses to status debuffs. All of them get just wiped off.
Well, I think that what you just brought up, though, is what he's trying to teach you, because bosses are going to be like that too. You don't really debuff bosses. Maybe you lower their strength and stuff, but you don't give them poison, faint, or whatever. And oftentimes you'll fight bosses that don't have very good weaknesses, that have high stats. You have to know how to deal with that. And so this is a way to force you to deal with that. And the way that you deal with it is by using your S-crafts and by using your strong single target arts.
To me, bosses should have weaknesses and be susceptible to status debuffs in any kind of game.
Well, that might be what you think, but that is not how they are.
I'll just give this in brief before we can move on to Tita and Estelle and Joshua and Estelle. But if you don't have weaknesses, if you don't have debuffs, the player will not be trained to use them to exploit them, because for most enemies, you don't have to think about the strategic use of debuffs or weaknesses to certain archetypes. It's just A and maybe an AoE craft. Otherwise, I don't know. I think bosses should be similar in kind and quality to normal monsters.
I agree with you for the most part. And I think that also, if you allow the majority of your bosses be susceptible to status afflictions, having the odd one out that doesn't then just makes that boss even more menacing, which can be very important.
The end game or arc one halfway point bosses, that I agree with.
Yeah. So you wanted to talk more about Estelle, Joshua, and Tita's relationship.
Yeah, because we see Estelle adopt Tita as a little sister slash pet, which Joshua is rightly like, kind of weird, Estelle. And then we see something.
No, hold up.
That
Josh did not say kind of weird, Estelle, about the sister part.
About the pet.
About the pet part, yes.
Yeah. No, he was very touching. I thought very good about the sister part and him as a brother. And then we see Joshua and Estelle have, I would say to me, it's an upgrade for their relationship with the hot spring bath.
Yeah, and it's certainly an upgrade on Estelle's part, because Estelle starts consciously realizing that she has these feelings that we've been kind of seeing.
So Joshua, Estelle, and Tita are told to go to the resort town of, and I kid you not, Elmo by Zeiss to fix the pump that broken down.
I really wish that there was an NPC there called Grover, because if there was an NPC called Grover, it would have been amazing.
So Joshua and Estelle and Tita go to the resort town, and after some adventures, a small quest, they go to the hot springs bath.
So something that I want to touch on before we talk about the hot springs stuff is that Elmo is an interesting town in and of itself, because it's basically a lot of immigrants from Calvert live here. It's very Eastern facing. In modern society, we might say that this is like a Chinatown to some extent. A lot of people are of Eastern descent. We have Eastern style architecture, and we know that this is close to the Calvard border, because one of the gates that you can go to is the Calvard border. And so I think it's just notable to point that out, because we are starting to see some notable characters from Calvard, Zin, who we're going to meet soon. Kilika knows Zin and appears to be of Eastern descent as well.
Kilika knows Zin. This is when Estelle gives some of her less than thoughtful comments about Kilika and Zin, both Easterners. She's like, oh yeah, why wouldn't they know each other? They're both Easterners, which not the most sensitive comment, Estelle. So one complaint I had for this was Tita's in our party, but she goes to fix the hot spring while Joshua and Estelle go back into the plains for a small quest. It's short, but we don't have Tita for this. We don't have the new unit. I totally understand, and I quite like each chapter you get a new unit, or maybe two, with one coming in the very end. It's variety. But if we're given a new unit, a new character, let us use that person from here on out. Don't make it so we can't have them for important missions and quests, like we see here, and we'll see later on with the tower.
Yeah, we're going to have words about the tower because I really disagree with you, especially about the tower. But I even disagree with you here as well. It's not like we don't use Tita in the chapter. We do. We use Tita quite a bit. But here is an important moment because it's us, like, narratively speaking. It's Estelle and Joshua saying, this is Tita's wheelhouse. We need to let her be independent and fix this problem. Now we're going to go do what bracers do. It's kind of like you're not babysitting her. It's reinforcing the fact that Tita is an equal member of the party. She is competent in her own way, which we might see some challenges to later, but that's what it's trying to get at.
They could have had it. We have to assist her, Joshua and Estelle, in a cutscene, can follow her orders, and then she can tell them we need X plant or whatever. So let's go to this monster and get it. And then she's the one saying, go here, don't go there. She can be calling the shots, as it were, and we still keep her as a unit for the quest.
I see what you're saying. I do. I like this angle that they take because it's stressing the fact that Tita's living her life and Estelle and Joshua are living their lives. Tita does not exist to revolve around the party. You know, the party can break up at different times. Something that's wrong with a lot of early JRPGs is that once a party member joins the party, they're there for good. And it's almost as if the party takes precedence over everything else.
And that's one of the absolute best parts about this series. I commented on Twitter not too long with NPC relationships that were shown in the special collections art book for first chapter, second chapter. And these NPCs, they live in a world in which Joshua and Estelle are a part,
yes,
not the center. And that's so good. But damn it, I want an AoE mage.
I mean, that for that fight, it would have been nice to have some AoE. I think it's at around this point that Josh learns his Black Sever S-Craft, I think it's called. But it's a nuke the entire field and damage every single enemy as opposed to one of them. And I find that to be very useful.
The pump is fixed, and that gives our three people a chance to go to the staple of anime, manga, JRPGs, the hot spring, and also have a staple of mixing up the unisex. It's not played for curvy giggles. We do see a lot of, I think, excellent work of Joshua and Estelle, especially Estelle, on who are these people to each other. What does Joshua mean to Estelle? What does Estelle mean to Joshua? It is not played for the cheap laugh. It's played very serious, I think.
I agree. And I think what this scene also does is kind of firmly establish that we are playing as Estelle, first and foremost, because we're seeing her thought process about it. We don't see Joshua's. And Joshua has his reactions, but we don't see his thoughts. We kind of have to infer what parts of it are him acting, what parts of it are him being real. Much like Estelle, we're guessing at Joshua's feelings towards her, whereas we know Estelle's feelings towards Joshua.
You can't deny it anymore. And Estelle can't deny it even to herself. She has non-sibling love, romantic feelings for Joshua.
Yes. So I am fine with it because I've played through these games and I've long since accepted it. But let's face the elephant in the room. At first glance, this is incest. It's not incest blood-wise, but culturally, a Western audience is going to take this as incest. How do you feel about this relationship, Kevin?
So I can definitely see how some people would look at this and be creeped out. It's weird. It's incestuous. I think I'm a bit more hesitant than you are, Colin, but I do come on the side of I think it's fine because Joshua, yes, has been a step sibling to Estelle for 6 years, 5 years. But, and let's keep this in mind, they only met at age 10, 11 or so. Brief sidebar, there's something called the Westermark effect. If you raise children, blood related or not, until about 6, 7 or so years of age, they will not, in 99% of circumstances, develop romantic feelings of each other, whether it's the same gender or the opposite gender, doesn't matter. But after that, and especially say 10 and up, you introduce them, it can happen. And we can see here with these step siblings, it's happened in the game. And it's not treated as a, oh, step sibling makes it more forbidden, makes it more attractive. It's treated as Estelle is confused. She does not understand what these thoughts and feelings are. How can she separate them from what she thinks about Joshua, the brother who she's been with? It's, to me, it's given the respect and weight it deserves.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I've long, for the past couple of years, I have been in the habit of saying that this relationship right here is one of, if not the best written relationship I've ever seen in video games. I think it goes back to what we were talking about a couple of episodes back too, which is that they take their time. This relationship, it's a slow burn. We just finished chapter 3 of this game. There's 4 chapters, so the next chapter is the last one. But we have a whole other game after that, which, as I've told you, is very, very, very closely tied to this game. They were developed as one game. So we get to really see the full length of this relationship.
How often do we see Joshua and Estelle insult each other? Not tease, but insult.
Very rarely, and it's mostly Estelle doing it to Joshua if she gets particularly angry. But it happens very rarely.
Maybe she'll go too far. Maybe she'll just be a bit too aggressive, but she will understand and draw back and apologize.
Yeah.
It's not constant bickering. Ha ha ha. It's, they have good natured teasing, but you can see in every chapter, in every major event, at least you have a rock solid foundation of respect and trust for each other.
Absolutely.
And I want to just highlight a particular scene where Estelle, it's so obvious these feelings are non-platonic subtext.
Okay.
She's blushing in the bath when she says, I didn't mean that I'm disgusted at the thought of being in there with you or anything, ... And to keep in mind, being in there in the bath without any clothing on either of them.
Well, I mean, they have towels on, but yes, that is certainly the subtext. And in fact, it's interesting. The sprite has towels on them, but the owner of the establishment treats it as if Estelle is naked and was caught being naked.
Oh, it's clear the sprites are for the player, for this as a game. Within the narrative of the story, they do not have the towel.
Okay, I'll be curious to see if we hold that same thing to be true when we get to Trails of Cold Steel, because there I feel like they're definitely wearing towels. But I think you're right that in this scene, it's more so that there's not an X-rated version of the game.
Okay, so we get back, and Professor Russell, Tita's grandfather, the man who invented the Orbital Revolution, who has done more for the widespread use of orbs in daily life and combat and the economy, he's kidnapped.
He is. He's kidnapped by guys in black that look very similar to the people that we had seen in the beginning of the chapter. But when they get into the elevator, taking him away, they change into Royal Guardsman garb so that when they run out of the factory, it looks like it's a bunch of people from the Royal Guard carrying a sack of something out of the building, so nobody stops them. It's at that moment that Dorothy, the photographer from the Liberl News, happens to be there. We had seen her before in Elmo. She takes a picture of the Royal Guardsman running away with a big old package, and that becomes very important.
Yes, we track them to where else but a tower. And we go up to the floors of the tower, fighting enemies, getting chests, and we get to the roof of the tower, where we have a very difficult boss fight.
Yes, yes, we do. But don't you want to bitch about how Tita's not with us?
Oh, yes. I was going to do this in the end when she comes right after the boss fight in the cutscene.
Okay.
So Tita is not here with us. It's Joshua, Estelle, and Agate. I think this is a gameplay mistake. Again, we don't have these new units for much time. It's one chapter. And we can't use Tita for the pump quest. We cannot use Tita for the tower quest. It feels like she's not with us all that long. I think it's a mistake because her AoE would have been very helpful for a lot of the enemies in the tower and especially for the big boss fight with the masked men.
So I agree with you that with the masked men, having the ability to give them blindness through Tita's craft would have been very useful because they hit fast, they hit like a truck, they cause a T delay, which means that you're taking your turns later. It's a bitch of a fight. I mean, it took me like 4 or 5 tries to do this. Mind you, I've played through all of the games. I know how to play Trails, and it kicked my ass. But I would say, and we're going to get into this scene, I think that this is a deliberate narrative choice. And you were not complaining, but you have made the point on numerous occasions that narrative and gameplay need to intertwine. If they don't, we have little narrative dissonance. Here is where I think that the absence of Tita contributes to the narrative of the game because we are feeling her loss. But then she comes after we told her to step away, and then causes problems of her own through her own actions.
Oh, yes. And what problems they are. So after we defeat the boss fight, an airship comes to take Professor Russell away to who knows where. They could never see him again for all they knew. They're getting close to make the transfer from the tower to the airship. Agate knows they have one shot and one shot only. He tells Joshua and Estelle, get ready, move on my signal. And then what happens? Tita comes in. She starts shooting the airship. She breaks the moment. Not only that, she causes the masked men to freak out. They load Professor Russell on. They shoot Agate, almost killing him. And it seems like they've gotten away scot-free. And Agate, Colin? Agate is understandably furious with Tita. And I think in this rant of his, this diatribe, he is 100% in the right. I know you.
Hold on, I just want to point out that they didn't shoot Agate. They shot at Tita, and Agate got in front of the bullet, which is important too.
Agate took the bullet meant for Tita. Tita almost got herself killed.
Yeah.
She almost got her protector, the most experienced bracer on the case, killed.
Yeah.
She almost let slip through their hands the chance to rescue her grandfather, an important inventor, engineer, abducted for nefarious purposes. Agate's angry.
Agate is pissed. He has words to say.
He says that she would have gotten in the way. She screwed up their one shot at getting Professor Russell back safely. Then he asks an important question of her. Are you planning to accept responsibility? And that's important, Colin, I think, for one big reason. And let me say that. He's not just venting his frustration. He's saying, you messed up bad, and here's why. Here are the consequences intended and unintended. Can you accept that? Can you be an adult and accept that?
Right.
He's not treating her like a child. His words are, the surface reading, snot-nosed. Go under your covers and cry. But he's not telling her to do that. It's an option. That's one option. The other option is to accept responsibility, understand what she's did, what it could mean, even if she didn't intend it to, and do her part to make things better, to fix it.
I find Agate's relationship with Tita to be an incredibly interesting one, and we'll see it develop more even in the second game. But I think you're right on the mark in your analysis of his dialogue here, and the game kind of points you towards that conclusion itself, right? Because Estelle appears to be, she's very critical of Agate. She only sees Agate as a bit of a bully towards Tita. And let's not mince words, he's very brusque to Tita. If I had a big, scary guy yelling at me, at that point, I would break down and cry too. There's no doubt. But Josh makes the astute observation that Agate has a hard exterior, but he's a softie on the inside. And you really start to see that here. Like before, our communications with Agate have been trying to earn his respect, but that's kind of a stereotypical thing that you're going to need to get from this hardened warrior type person. But it's in this scene that you see an additional depth to Agate's character.
Question, Colin. I want your thoughts on this. In our interactions with Agate, he can be brusque, a bit rude, but is he ever, especially when it counts, unfair or wrong in his assessments in what he says?
So in what he says, yes, because he will, at least in the beginning, he continuously talk down to Josh and Estelle without really having firsthand knowledge of their abilities. But once he gets into the situation in which they're fighting alongside each other and he can see what's going on there, you certainly see that he's starting to, accept them.
Okay, but to play Agate's advocate, he sees two kids, very young, in a situation that is much too dangerous for their junior bracer status, in a situation where they are very close to the issue, the disappearance of Cassius. So I think he's not unfair in being very skeptical about them. The information he has would lead him to think these kids can't cut it. He changes his opinion when he gets presented with new information.
What I would point out is that you did not ask me, is everything that Agate says relatable or understandable? Is he wrong? And sometimes he is wrong. His assumptions about Estelle and Joshua in the beginning are wrong. And we know this because we beat his expectations by playing the game.
Okay, so I will amend my statement by saying he is wrong, but I don't think he is unfair.
No, I mean, in a way, it makes him one of the most relatable characters because he has his worldview. It's a worldview that a lot of adult players are going to understand because it's probably the worldview that we have, or at the very least want to have. He's kind of like the dose of realism into this fantasy 16-year-olds are wandering around the world.
He's like, no, this is weird and not okay and incredibly dangerous. Back to Tita, what he tells her after, some very brusque and harsh truths, he says, okay, shape up, get some courage. You got to learn to stand on your own. Learn to take care of yourself before you run off trying to rescue others. I think that's great advice.
Yeah, we need more self-sufficiency. Maybe self-sufficiency isn't the right word, but I think that he's pointing out an essential truth about human nature, especially in the context of this game in which you have bracers running around being vigilantes. You need to have a certain inner strength to carry out the stuff that Estelle and Joshua are doing, that Tita wants to do. And by only reacting emotionally, you're going to cause more problems. And that's a lesson that sometimes Estelle has to learn. And this is Agate, I think, pushing Tita in the right direction to get her to that point of maturity that she can then stand with Estelle and Joshua.
Emotions can guide you. They cannot control you.
Or they should not. They definitely can.
Yeah, they should not.
So we get down from the tower, and it turns out that Agate he's getting a bit too weak compared to what we would expect just for a normal gunshot wound. Probably because this bullet had been laced with poison and it's slowly killing him from the inside. Luckily, on the way back, we run into a guy that we had run into a little bit before, but we weren't properly introduced to him at the time, is a Eastern bracer by the name of Zin Vithek, who carries Agate back to the clinic in Zeiss. Kevin, what are your thoughts on Zin?
We don't know much about him as a character at this point. He's a bracer. So there's this instant camaraderie between Joshua, Estelle, and him. Remember, to this point, we've not seen any bracers gone bad. The worst we've seen is Agate, who still clearly has a good heart, wants to make the world a better place, and does. He's helpful, he's strong, he listens to Joshua and Estelle. He does not treat them like children. He treats them like colleagues.
Yeah, he kind of treats them like a senior faculty member is treating a first-year junior faculty member who hasn't earned tenure yet. They're willing to accept them eventually, but at first he kind of looks down on them.
Yeah, which again, that's understandable and not entirely wrong. From the information that he himself has, he's being extremely curious by deferring to them on some issues.
All right, but counterpoint to this, Zin knows the exact same information as Agate does when he meets Estelle and Joshua, maybe even less. And yet Zin does not treat them in any way, shape, or form like Agate treats them.
Counter, he does not know that their central mission at this point is about finding their father.
Well, okay, but it's not true. That's not their central mission.
But Agate, when they met Agate, that's what it was.
Yes.
That's what I'm saying. So Agate is seeing these two, at that time, much less experienced bracers compared to in Zeiss. They want to find their father, and he thinks they're too close. With Zin, they want to get Agate to safety and stop the conspiracy, and they do have recommendations from the other guild members, the other cities, which he would most likely know, talking to Kilika, being involved in the Zeiss branch, which that's not the first time he was there. So
he might know that. He might not know that. That is speculation, Kevin. You have to be more precise. The fact of the matter is we never see Zin actually know that, but also Zin never asks about that. You know, that's something that I think really stands out with Agate versus Zin, is that Zin sees the situation, says, these are bracers, I'm going to help them, including going into the cave. Never once does Zin feel the need to question qualifications. Never once does Zin feel the need to say, well, this is too dangerous for the junior bracers, I'm going to go alone. He's a team player from the beginning.
But Colin, let me counter that by saying they have an immediate pressing need. They need this moss from the cave. Joshua and Estelle are the only other people who can go with Zin. He can't do it alone. It's any boat, any port in a storm. You go to war with the army you have. They don't have time to be questioning. When Agate met Joshua, Estelle, and Shira, it was not this immediacy of the life and death situation of, if we don't act now, someone's going to die.
I hear you on that. And this is going to be speculation on my part, but one thing that keeps being stressed as we're finding out where this medicine is going to be is that it's a very dangerous thing to find, because they send in teams of bracers, 3 to 4, and sometimes they don't make it back out alive. I don't think that Agate would sit there and say, then yes, I'm going to let Joshua and Estelle go. If he was in Zin's position, Agate would have been very hard-headed and would have demanded that he go alone.
So question, sidebar, how many bracers are there if they can semi-routinely or not, once in the blue moon, lose 3 or 4, and that's not seen as a catastrophic loss? Or is it hundreds, thousands? How many are there?
Probably hundreds. I don't think we have an exact number, but it's more than just the people we know.
Yeah, I mean, with the game engine and limitations, we can't, see everyone in the Bracer Guild Hall. I would be shocked if there were no Bracers in Zeiss besides Agate, Zin, Joshua, Estelle.
I mean, certainly in Grand Cell, there are multiple. There are quite a bit of Bracers there. Also, this is me not doing my due diligence, but there are second floors to all of these guild halls for the Bracer Guild. Sometimes there are Bracer members up there that you can talk to. Now, I haven't checked out any of them this playthrough, so I don't remember if there are actually any of them. I know in other games, like in the Crossbell games, you will find unnamed Bracer members at the Bracer Guild. What I'm trying to say is that this is not a small organization. It's not the size of a military, but they have numbers.
So the loss of 4 or 5, if a mission goes bad, is not we have to reassess all our priorities.
If I were them, I probably would have to reassess my priorities, but probably they would be like, we need to send in a rescue mission to get them out. We need to only make sure to send our best. It's going to cause difficulties for the local guild branch to lose 3 or 4 members, but it's not going to put a halt to their operations either.
Yeah, and we're talking about this because this is a theme we've seen before. The modern medicine cannot save Agate. We need the traditional, old, lost secret guarded by the Church of Idios.
It's not necessarily that the Church of Idios is hiding this recipe. It's priests seem to be very good at medicine. This priest knows about this medicine, knowing it from Eastern sources. He's more than willing to tell us where to go to get it and to make it himself. The The church as an institution is not guarding this knowledge. It's he happens to know that.
But it's still old knowledge.
Yeah.
And it's foreign. It's old and foreign. And when in fantasy works, that is an immediate clue. This is potent stuff. Unlike today, where we would not trust. No, I'm serious. It's a deliberate dissonance between then and now.
Well,
you
say that, but we also know people that do think that this is true.
Yes, but it is not the cultural norm. The way it clearly is in most fantasy and in here.
At the very least in this game, I think we would say that modern medicine is the default, but the potential for traditional medicine to do things that modern medicine cannot do is accepted as a fact. Whereas in modern society, we don't really see that for most of the people.
So it's a pretty straightforward mission. We go clear some caves, fight a tough boss fight, and come back.
Yeah,
not much to say.
That penguin can die in a hole. And let me say why. Number one, penguins are assholes because they can cause your members to get confused. Luckily, I already knew that, so I managed to equip some accessories on at least Joshua and Estelle to stop them from being confused. But also, I don't know if this was true for you, but this motherfucking king penguin just kept boosting his defense, like boosting. So I'm doing like no damage. Meanwhile, he is like doing chain lightning. And I'm like constantly having to stop to heal, which means that I'm not doing damage. But whenever he boosts his defense, he heals himself too. Something that I hate in like every video game are bosses that heal themselves because it feels like progress is being taken away from me.
Yes, boss fights being tough and challenging is a good thing. Boss fights where the player feels their effort is wasted, or any instance in the game where the player feels their effort is wasted, take a look to last week's episode. I went down the side path. That was a mistake. I'm going to reload. These kind of things should not happen. This boss fight felt a lot of the times attacking a stone wall.
Yes. As a stone wall that eventually breaks down because, you know, you win the fight. But that was not a fun fight. That was I need to finish this fight to get a fucking move on fight.
So we do. Agate recovers, and Dorothy comes in with a picture of the main military fort for the kingdom, Leiston Fortress, taken at night, which is not allowed any civilians photographing military installations. What's notable is she sees in the foreground an airship, not just any airship, but the airship that Professor Russell was abducted on.
Right.
That airship is at Leiston Fortress. The military is involved in kidnapping one of its own citizens. Why?
Well, that's the question. We don't know if that's the case happening yet. I think we need to back up and cover a couple of things real quick because it's important to what's about to happen. The intelligence division with Colonel Richard and Captain Amalthea are nominally cooperating with the Bracer Guild to investigate Russell's disappearance. As part of that, though, they do take Dorothy's photo quartz where she took a picture of the quote-unquote royal guardsmen who were transporting what we know to be Professor Russell to the tower. So that quartz has been taken away, and the military can do whatever they want with it. They promise they're going to give it back, but they don't. But nominally, the intelligence division claims that they're helping the Bracer Guild. Joshua and Estelle go to Leiston Fortress to see if they can get an audience to pass on this intelligence to the intelligence division. But they're told that nobody from the intelligence division is there, that they're not in Leiston Fortress at all. And when asked where they are, Josh is just told that it's classified. They'll communicate the intel and send them on their way. Which leads Josh and Estelle to the conclusion that they need to sneak into Leiston Fortress to really investigate what's going on.
So they sneak in, not just them, but Agate and also Tita, who says she wants to help. She needs to help, to take responsibility for letting them get away with her grandfather for who knows what nefarious purpose. And Agate reflects on this and he accepts her help.
Yes. They get into the ship and they go off. It's at that moment that Dorothy comes to Gustav, the chief maintenance guy, and says something that she was going to tell Josh and Estelle, but we already left, which is that she just heard word from the capital that a bunch of royal guardsmen had been arrested for treason.
And as we see, the royal guard are not the real traitors. We see a cutscene with Colonel Richard the commander of the fortress, Major Sid, and Professor Russell, who has the Black Ornament. That Colonel Richard, he calls it by a name, the gospel. He's showing he knows what this is.
Yeah.
He has some sort of familiarity with this ornament, with the artifact. He knows what it can do. He has a plan for it, and he's showing that he is the mastermind behind what's going on. He is all of a sudden the quote, big bad, end quote, as far as we can tell.
Yeah, no, this is the first time, in this kind of way I say that I think the plot starts here, because this is the first time that we have an identifiable target, as a potential endgame boss or a villain or whatever. Yes, we had the shadowy stuff, but we had nobody to point at.
The plot starts here 30 hours into the game, 8 episodes into our podcast.
To be fair, half of those episodes are not about the game. But yes, I mean, we're more than halfway through the game. The last chapter is the next chapter. This is the penultimate chapter. Now, chapter 4 is long as shit, so we need to keep that in mind as well. But it is remarkable. Normally I have a rule, and this rule I adopted after I played Octopath Traveler, is that if after 20 hours I don't know who the main villain is, I'm going to stop playing the game. And I don't always follow that rule. And Trails, you can't follow it. But really, it's like there needs to be something to hook you in order for you to keep playing. And I give a game like 20 hours to do that. Trails does it by its characters, I think, in its world.
Yes, because we don't really see the overarching plot. The disappearance of Cassius, that gets solved pretty early on. Not as in he's safe, but he's not dead, he's not kidnapped, he's doing something. So that impetus, that reason for leaving home, it's gone.
Yeah.
But it's the characters, and especially the relationship with Joshua and Estelle.
But now that we've put in all of the effort to finally get to the plot, now we have the plot. Now we see that there's political intrigue, because it seems that the intelligence division confiscated Dorothy's photo quartz in order to frame the royal guardsmen, to get them arrested for treason. What does that do? That does a number of things. For one, it removes the protection that the monarch will have, because the royal guard cannot protect them anymore because they're quote unquote treasonous. Imagine if the Secret Service was arrested en masse for betraying the president, allegedly. That opens up a lot of security vulnerabilities that somebody else has to step in to fill in. And the intelligence division is in a perfect position to do that.
And what I find really awesome is how the intel division, who highly effective, they don't have a lot of manpower, a lot of raw numbers. How were they able to get the generals and the army on their side? Easy. A lot of the generals were corrupt, weak, stupid, or some combination. And so they played on the venal, base aspects of their characters, of their flaws. And I think that is so human and relatable and much more interesting than everyone is somehow part of a grand secret conspiracy. 3 people may keep a secret if 2 are dead. It seems clear this conspiracy is small. It's centered on a small faction of people, Colonel Richard and his associates, and I'm glad they were able to get this mass mobilization in other ways besides we're all part of the ancient order of the Shadow Council of Doom.
Something that I find really intriguing about what you just said is looking at how Richard and the other generals operated. I mean, this guy's only a colonel, right? It's not like he outranks anybody, but he's kind of used his the charismatic position of his office, to use Bavarian terms, to assert power over and beyond what he's officially given, right? The only general that we know of that says no, that rejects his claim to power, is General Morgan in the Hocking Gate. And if we remember back to our episode for chapter 1, when we meet them, is that I brought both of these figures up as points of comparison for 2 different modes of politics. That General Morgan was your idealist, your traditionalist. Liberl needs to be strong, independent. The military is its own institution. We don't need the bracers. Richard also wants a strong Liberl, but is willing to do whatever he needs to do in order to bring that about, including using the Bracer Guild. We're seeing the same thing here. Richard clearly does have principles. He clearly does have a grand vision for a strong Liberl. He mentions this to Russell in his little speech, but he takes advantage of Liberl's weakness in order to drive forward his plot to increase its strength.
early on in the game, this flexibility we think of as something good. He's not hidebound. He can work with people who want to help. We like his willingness to work with Joshua and Estelle to take down the Sky Bandits. We dislike the general Hack being so obtuse and so difficult to work with. General Morgan is not someone we are meant to like.
No.
Here it's flipped. The stubbornness of General Morgan is principled. This flexibility of Colonel Richard, it's really a devious nature, the ends justify the means. And nothing about them, how they operate, has changed. It's who they operate on and on what side are the characters we've come to know.
Right. And it's also, I think, our knowledge of their motivations is different. So we could respect Morgan before, but we don't like him. Why? Because he's acting against us. We have our own perspective as bracers. With Richard, we like him because Richard looks nice. He speaks very nicely. He's cooperative. We have no reason to suspect him of nefarious dealings. Now, obviously, we do because we see him acting nefariously. And therefore, our perspective on what principles matter changes. Even though nothing about the characters changed, what we value as players is going to change. You know, everybody hates Cato for being stuffy and conservative at the fall of the Roman Republic. But then when Julius Caesar comes in and tries to destroy the whole thing, all of a sudden Cato is the principled guy.
These characters have not changed. It's how we interact and relate to them through the changing of the world, through how Joshua and Estelle, they've come to change and come to mature. And it really says something good. How we can have such different opinions on the same characters who have not really changed how they interact, what they do, except where we are in relation to them.
I think it's a real strength of their character-driven narrative because these feel like real people that then we have real emotions towards. But okay, we see Colonel Richard. He has his big dastardly plan, or we know that there is one. We don't really know what it is yet, but we managed to get Russell out of there. Now, while in the fortress, we see that the hooded black figure that had fought Agate is here, appears to be in cahoots with Colonel Richard, as we had talked about before. But also, we end up fighting a couple of guards, which then puts the fortress on high alert. They know that we've invaded. Major Sid puts everybody on lockdown, search for the invaders, us, and goes off on his way. So you think that Major Sid is an adversary, but he ends up being the one to save you, to pull you into his headquarters and give you a way out of the fortress to escape. And I think that this is an interesting moment as well, because it shows that while Richard thinks that he has dominated everything, and in a sense he has taken over the military complex, but much like how there is no such thing as absolute power in a system, Richard cannot actually control what Sid does. He can put limits on what Sid does, right? Which is why Sid has to follow orders, why Sid doesn't always get to speak up, etc. But when Richard's gone and Sid sees that we need help, he steps in to help us because this is a person who does believe in the principles of the borough, probably the same principles that General Morgan has, but now he's in a position to help us and therefore he acts on that.
And we leave and end the chapter with Joshua and Estelle once again going their separate ways, heading for the capital, Gransel, for the climax of the game.
Yes, and we will see where that climax takes us in 2 weeks' time. What did you think about this chapter overall, Kevin?
I thought the back half was a lot more interesting. The front half, it wasn't bad. It was just kind of there. Besides the scenes with Joshua, Estelle, and Tita, they were the heart of it. Everything else, getting to Zeiss and all that, it was good. Don't get me wrong, but it's not as memorable as what we see when the professor gets kidnapped to the end.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. I think what strikes out to me the most about this chapter, other than, yes, the plot actually starts, yay, is that I think this is where we start to see the side quests actually start to shine. Before, in the other chapters, they're all, pretty basic. You have a couple of ones that might be memorable, but probably aren't. But I remembered side quests from this when I now have revisited it. I remembered the Smokers Revolt quest. I remembered the book hunting quest because one of the books teaches you how to speak like a cat, and you can use that book to understand the cats in the game. Like they're speaking actual dialogue that you can decode through this game. I remember the character of Antoine. You see Antoine because he also snuck up on a crate, and there's kind of like a comic scene when we're invading the fortress that we think we're about to get caught, but then it's just Antoine. But Antoine is also the cat that guides you to where Murdoch is, where he's hiding the cigarettes in the Smoker's Revolt quest. So here we're starting to see the side quests being used to really flesh out the city of Zeiss, to flesh out the characters in Zeiss, that to me made Zeiss a lot more memorable than Bose or Rouen were.
Feels alive and connected, not a series of independent, isolated units.
Yeah, and I will say, I think that the game carries this along. Like the side quests in SC are a lot more interesting and fun than the side quests in FC, because like my suspicion is that they really hit their stride designing the side quests in Zeiss, but couldn't go back and like put more in for the earlier stuff.
So I think that's it for us today. All that's left are predictions, mine, and then something new we're going to be doing. But first, what do I think is going to happen for the end of the game, for the next chapter? I've been pretty open how I think Joshua is sus.
Yes, you have been.
There's a weird, dark past about him.
Isn't your theory that he's a serial killer?
Yes, I still kind of think that, but I think that he was a member of whichever dark secret group Colonel Richard is a part of, that he leads. Joshua was involved somehow. You can't have too many evil conspiracies running about. They'll work at cross purposes. They'll corner the market on black cloaks, drive up cost. It's not sustainable.
It's an economic nightmare.
That's what I think. That's my main one. But now, not what I think is going to happen, but something we want to ask all of you. What are your favorite quests and why in video games? Or what are some of the ones you hate? You can send answers to us. iTunes, Spotify, rate and review, 5 points, 5 stars, nothing less than 5 stars is acceptable. Twitter @TrailsInThePod. We've been having some great convos and messages there. Gmail, trailsinthepod@gmail.com. But Colin, why don't you answer this for yourself? What's a quest you hate or love?
Well, sure. Before I do that, I want to give context to our listeners so that they know why we're asking that question. We got a very nice direct message from one of our listeners on Twitter in the past week who made the suggestion that we end each episode with a question like this. And we want to thank that individual for giving us the suggestion. It's a very good one. It's especially good, I think, at the end of these chapter episodes, because if we decide what our non-chapter episodes are going to be, then we can ask you guys questions that directly relate to that. Maybe, as you can guess, our next non-chapter episode is going to be quest design. Therefore, we want to know what some of your favorite quests are. I've seen that you've written in the Google Doc the Bloody Baron quest in The Witcher 3, and I'll let you talk about that in a minute. The reason why I'm bringing that up is because when I think of really interesting side quests, that's also one that I immediately jump to. So thanks for stealing my thunder there, but you have the priority of the written word. Something that I'm a fan of are when quests in games take you to do something almost completely different than the core gameplay loop, but done well. If it's an alternative gameplay style that doesn't work, it's fucking frustrating. But like I'm thinking back to Assassin's Creed Unity. The majority of it is in revolutionary era France. But every so often you run into a time rift that takes you to Paris in another time period, in the Belle Epoque. Or during World War II. And that is interesting because it lets the developers flex their historical muscles, and you get to see Paris in a completely different setting. And I love that stuff. That stuff really sticks out in my mind. The same goes during the side quests in Grand Theft Auto 5, where your character gets really high and starts hallucinating. So you have to kill a lot of aliens because they're coming to probe you. So I like that kind of stuff, but in terms of traditional JRPGs, I have not thought about what precisely some of my favorite quests are, but I will be thinking about that later.
Bloody Baron in Witcher 3. It's one of my favorite quest lines, and I think a lot of people it's their favorite or most memorable quest. In brief, it's our choices matter. It's a well-written and poignant story come to life with characters who we get to know, who have impact on the larger narrative of The Witcher, who have conflict with each other, who love each other, but have goals that cannot be achieved at the same time between the major players operating in the quest. There's no one happy ending. People will win and some will lose, and that's life. You have to make your choice and live with the consequences of that decision. That is illustrated so well in the Bloody Baron quest line. Plus, we get spooky witch shit with like hags, and they have weird eldritch forms. Who does not like some light Lovecraft in the game?
Amen to that. With that, folks, thanks very much for listening. Again, you can get in contact with us on Twitter at Trails in the Pod. You can email us, trailsinthepod@gmail.com. If you want to help the show out, if you like what we do here, we implore you to rate and review us on your podcast manager of choice, be it Apple, be it Spotify, be it Overcast, wherever you get your podcasts. By rating us, you're going to help the algorithm promote us and get other people to know who we are. Also, if you know of anybody that likes JRPGs and wants to listen to two guys who think they're really smart talk about them, please share it with them. If you know other friends that like the Trails series and you think that the conversations that we have here are interesting, please share it with them. All we want is to spread the love of Trails. And with that, we will see you next week. Bye-bye, everyone.